Okay, so next up is Jeanne Nel to talk to us about national indicators for measuring levels of threat and protection of ecosystems. So go for it.
Thank you. Simon, that was the presentation you should have given yesterday.
I think you should have given this one yesterday.
Well, this is freshwater biodiversity outcomes. Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the biodiversity sector in South Africa has been doing around trying to measure ecosystem threat status and ecosystem protection levels as a way to measuring progress actually towards Aichi Target 11. So if you look at South Africa's current protected areas, and the green areas, I don't think the blue really shows up, but 7% of our land area is protected, so we fall quite far behind the Aichi 17%, 22% of our coastline and less than 1% of our offshore marine. But really, one of the things that we've been quite good at, despite being quite low on the percentage, is representation. So we've been doing representation of ecosystems for quite a while in South Africa, and our protected area network, we like to think, is moving towards representation rather than absolute area. That's the one thing. And then the other thing is, what does this tell you about our conservation outcomes, our improved condition of our land, of our water, and of our marine ecosystems? So what we've been doing is devising indicators that look at both of these, that tell you something about representation and tell you something about the condition of our ecosystems. We've got 3 level indicators. The first one is ecosystem threat status, which uses the IUCN threatened criteria: critically endangered, vulnerable, and least threatened. The second one is ecosystem protection level, which is assessed independently of ecosystem threat status, and it has 4 categories of unprotected, poorly protected, moderately protected, and well protected. And then if you integrate these 2 together, you'll get what we call ecosystem priority areas. And really what these indicators are is that the first one, the ecosystem threat status, tells you how threatened your ecosystems are. The ecosystem protection level tells you how underprotected our ecosystems are, and those together give you quite an interesting piece of information and describe the current situation. They really are a description. And the third one actually tells you what to do when you've got this described position. So it's much more of a normative planning process. Right, so what I'm going to do is take you through the absolute minimum data that you need to be able to do this, because I think we could actually do this. We're actually sitting at a point where we could do this roughly at a global level. The minimum information requirement you need is an ecosystem type, and you can classify your ecosystems according to vegetation types. Vegetation types have existed for a very long time. We've also got wetland types. You can use river ecosystem types. But with that, with each ecosystem type, so you could have a sandy grass veld or a high veld river or a floodplain river, different types of ecosystems, you need an aspirational conservation target to which you are working. That target for species, for vegetation types, has been set using species area curves. Unfortunately, in the freshwater realm, we actually don't have species area curves. So species area curves basically would say, if a vegetation type has got lots of species in it and it changes, the changeover, the beta diversity is very high, as you move from one space to another, you get more species, you'll need more target to cover all the species. Whereas if it's a very homogeneous vegetation type, you'll need a lower target. We don't have that in the freshwater realm because we don't have the luxury of having such good data. But what we've done is have an aspirational target of 20%, which is agreed upon by many key national agencies, water affairs, environment affairs, and other agriculture, other key agencies in South Africa. So it's an inspirational national target. With the target and the ecosystem type comes ecological condition. We do need some assessment of that. You can use land cover that grows this level, and there are ways of getting to this in the freshwater realm. It has also been published. And you need the location of your protected areas. With those 3 pieces of information, actually 4 with the conservation target, you can measure ecosystem threat status, you can take ecological condition, combine it with ecosystem type and protected area, and get ecosystem protection level. And just a little bit more on each of those. Ecosystem threat status is assessed for each ecosystem type, across the landscape. It's based on a series of thresholds that you assess the proportion of good condition river relative to a threshold. So for example, if less than 20% of your ecosystem type is in a good condition, you would be critically endangered in a river environment. Ecosystem protection level is also assessed for each ecosystem type. It's also based on a series of thresholds, and you assess it according to the proportion of your conservation target that is still in good condition in national parks or in protected areas. And for example, if a conservation target has been met by a protected area in good condition, then it would be well protected. It would be considered well protected, but it has to be in good condition as well. So here are the data sets, just drawing on some freshwater examples. We have 223 river ecosystem types that have been mapped across the country, and you can put them on a map, and each river that you see over there in the blue and black has got an ecosystem type attached to it. We also have a present ecological status, which is really a measure of ecosystem condition according to 6 indicators of flow modification, inundation, water quality, streambed condition, alien biota, and streambank condition. And you can measure the differences that we've got various ways of doing that and assess them according to different categories. And here we have a category from A to F in South Africa, which is from good unmodified natural condition all the way through to critically modified. And with those 2 pieces of information, you can then draw for each river reach your ecosystem threat status and your ecosystem protection levels. And in this way, you can start identifying areas that are river reaches that are really critically endangered but are very underprotected. Now, the caveat is that we are so hopelessly underrepresented with rivers and so hopelessly threatened with rivers that actually this information is not incredibly meaningful. It's much more meaningful in the terrestrial world, where we've been able to identify the unlucky 7, which have 0 protection and are critically endangered. But for freshwater ecosystems, we're very underrepresented in protected areas. And I'll show you that now. Yes. So you can do this for all settings, terrestrial settings, and freshwater and rivers, estuaries. And you can develop ecosystem threat status and ecosystem protection levels, and they tell you interesting things, and in a very simple way that can be communicated to national policymakers. So wetlands, for example, are the most threatened species, ecosystem types in South Africa. And rivers are doing better than offshore marine, but they're certainly much more underrepresented than terrestrial ecosystems. Right, so those 2 things, as I said, they give you description. But if you really want to then move forward and progress, what do you have to do? Where do you have to go? Where should you be representing your conservation areas to get your representation that you need, not just only your river length and your percentage area to fulfill the Aichi target? And that's where we come in with ecosystem priority areas, and where we do a systematic conservation plan, like what Simon has been explaining, to come up, based on conservation targets, to come up with conservation areas that people can work towards to fulfill a representative set of conservation areas. So you end up with a map that looks like this for every catchment. It's called a freshwater ecosystem priority area map. And if you start looking at those dark green areas and start working towards conserving the ecological integrity in these areas, we're actually working towards a representative set, not just a 17% target. And we've been using this recently in the National Protected Area Expansion Strategy, which actually, these maps informed where the terrestrial areas for the land-based protected areas will be in the next 20 years. So in conclusion, what I wanted to say is that we need good underpinning data, but the data that we need to start with, I mean, we can get fancier as we go, but we need a minimum data of ecosystem type classification, ecological condition, and protected areas. And we need to be monitoring these good data to be able to do these time series snaps. If we can't do that, we're not going to be able to track our progress, and we're not going to be able to do ecosystem accounts, and we're not going to be able to do any of the sexy stuff actually in a very good way that people are willing to fund. We actually need good basic data. And then we can track these progress through time. But the big thing for me is the good data collection happens at a local level, where it's synthesized through a local lens. And what needs to then happen is it needs to feed up to national level as well as to global level. And we need to get those loops and those feedbacks talking. And that's where I'm going to end off, because that's what Dirk's going to start with. That's what the subject of his talk is.